You were born in Riverside?
I was. I was born in Riverside a long, long time ago. Riverside's an interesting town. In the late 1890s, it was the highest per capita income of any town in America because of the Naval Orange Empire. The orange industry was there, and all the rich people from the Industrial Revolution moved to Riverside. And there for a few years, it was a really hotsy-totsy town. That was a little house I grew up in on 5th Street. It probably was my great uncle. He used to push me around in that early pram, which didn't look too sturdy. That little stepladder was dangerous. I about cut my finger off with that thing. I was helping my father wash the car. Notice that really neat late model car? Can you guess what kind of car that is? It was a Hudson. Long time. Now, you see how second graders used to dress when they went to school back in the old days? Yeah, we wore little suits and neckties. I was in the 2nd grade, 1952. My mother taught school at Miraloma, which was about 7 or 8 miles outside of Riverside. They made a movie about Miraloma. It was called The Changeling. And after that terrible thing that happened, they renamed the town Miraloma, and nobody spoke of the problem again. I was 13 years old and they're terrible fans, doing magic shows. All of my friends were delivering newspapers for $35 a month. And they'd have to get up really early to deliver their newspapers. And so I went down and bought a little set of tails, white tie, top hat, and went out and started doing magic shows. And I got $35 each time I did one for 30 minutes. And I did a lot of them. And I thought that beat the heck out of having to get up in the middle of the night to deliver newspapers.
Do you still remember the first show you did?
I do. I remember it. It was up on Hawarden Drive on the side of the hill. It was a little girl's birthday party, and her mother had called the Magic House of Charles, where I studied. And I went up and did her birthday party for $35. It was a lot of money back then. Years ago, I'd get booked into doing magic shows. And I never really particularly paid much attention who the show was for. But this is a particularly interesting picture. I think I was 16 or 17 or 18 years old. And I got booked into doing this show south of Riverside in a place called Del Webb's City. And I was busy getting my magic show ready, and there was an audience coming in, and they were seating themselves. And when they got seated, somebody came up to the lectern and said, "Well, folks, we'd like to welcome all of you retiring J.C. Penney managers. And we've got a very special treat for you today. Would you please welcome our founder, James Cash Penney?" J.C. Penney walked in the door, and I looked up and grabbed my Chinese linking rings and ran to him because I knew that that would be the picture they'd print in the newspaper. And so he reached out and grabbed the ring, and sure enough, the picture appeared in the Riverside Daily Press. So I got to meet James Cash Penney. He was 90 years old. So that would make him close to 150 today, I guess. Those were studio shots for the magic show. I used that particular shot on our KFXM tune sheet. I did Afternoon Drive on Fun 59 KFXM. It was the #1 station between LA and San Diego. And those were really fun days. I guess we'll talk more about KFXM later. That's The Floating Zombie Ball. When I was doing Afternoon Drive at KFXM, that's a radio show from 3 p.m. till 7 p.m. Afternoon Drive is called. And we'd all go out, all of the disc jockeys, and we would make personal appearances. And when I'd go out, they would promote my magic, and I'd do some magic tricks and sign autographs and do what you do with a personal appearance. Those were fun days. There's another story about KFXM. Let me see if I can remember it. The KFXM studios have been at a couple of different places. And for a while, when I was 16 or 17, they were located in the California Hotel in San Bernardino. I went in and tried to get a job. And the guy said to me, he said, you got a first-class radio license? I said, no. So you got to have one of those to work in radio. I said, well, how do I get one? He said, well, you go to the William B. Ogden School of Radio Operational Engineering in Burbank, California. I said, well, okay, if I go get one of those, will you give me a job? And he said, sure, kid. So I get my folks to enroll me at 1050 West Olive, downtown beautiful Burbank, California, the William B. Ogden School of Radio. All we did was learn the answers to these tests. We weren't going to become engineers. We just had to pass the FCC test to get this license in order to work the radio station. I got it on my 18th birthday. I got the license. I took the test, got my license on my 18th birthday. I went back to the hotel and I strutted into the beautiful California hotel and said, I'm here to see Mr. Cordell. And they said, oh, he doesn't work here anymore. he moved to Pittsburgh, California. I said, Pittsburgh? Is there a Pittsburgh, California? He said, yep. I said, oh, damn. Well, I later found out that he was also a record producer. And he'd found this little group years before, and he named them the Cordettes. And they had recorded this song called Mr. Sandman. And I thought that was pretty cool because back in those days, that was a terrific song. I still enjoy listening to it.
Another story, you were the opening magician for 31 Flavors Ice Cream?
Yes, I graduated from University of Southern California. And while attending there, I did two memorable things. One, the Magic Castle was just being built, and I became a member of the Magic Castle. I'm a life member of Milt Larson's Magic Castle. And I became the 31 Flavors Ice Cream Magician. My job was to dress up in my little tuxedo and go out to the openings of these 31 Flavors stores and do magic tricks. I remember one of them, you know, those ice cream containers, the way they get delivered, they're about this tall and this big around, and they're packed with ice cream, and then they scoop ice cream out of them. Well, I remember one of them, I would show the container would be empty, and then say the magic words and start pulling out ice cream cones for the people who came to the grand opening. And they decided to open a 30-second flavor. I don't think it worked, but it was a big promotion. They named it Bruce. The flavor was called Bruce. Couldn't figure out why they would name it Bruce, but they did. And they hired Jonathan Winters to be the spokesman for the introduction of the 30-second flavor. Mr. Robbins lived in Encino, California, had a beautiful mansion up there, and he invited us all up for a party. And I'll never forget that day. Most of the folks were out by the pool, and I got to sit for 20 or 30 minutes alone talking to Jonathan Winters, one of the most incredible minds ever born. He could entertain you for half an hour with a drinking straw. He could. His mind was just incredible. I'll never forget that. He was one of the great, great comedians of all time, Jonathan Winters.
Another thing we discussed earlier was how a little college radio station in La Sierra went on.
Well, yeah. When I was attending Poly High School in Riverside, I had interest for radio back even then. I started the Poly High Spotlight on the Air. It was a weekly Saturday morning radio show for my high school, Poly. And I guess it was either a senior or a sophomore in high school when I would leave school and go downtown and be an announcer on a radio station called Kduo FM. It played beautiful music, and I was 16 years old, so I'd have to take a deep breath and get my voice as low as possible and go, "This is 97.5 KDUO, the center aisle of your FM stereo dial." And then we play this elevator music, but I enjoyed it, so that's what I did after school while I was going to high school. KDUO later went up on a very high mountain and is now they bill themselves as a Los Angeles Hispanic station, and they do very, very well.
Another interesting thing we discussed was Skip Fordyce.
There was this motorcycle store in Riverside, California, at the end of Main Street. Main Street dead-ended into 14th Street. So, and at the very end of Main Street was Skip Fordyce Motorcycle Store. And they had these big arched windows. And once or twice every year or two, some drunk would come down Main Street and not stop the stoplight, cross the street, and smash into these big plate glass windows. An interesting story about Skip Fordyce: the first shock jock held a radio program in there. It was called It's Your Nickel, and he was really rude to people who would call up. He was he had lost his leg. He was a Marine and had lost his leg. And people would call up his radio show, and he would treat them terribly. But years later, he got a national television show that originated at KTTV Channel 11 in Los Angeles. His name was Joe Pine. You remember Joe Pine?
I do.
Yeah, he was the original shock jock, and he started in Riverside. Yeah.
Any other celebrities that started in Riverside about the time you lived there you can remember?
Just a few years before I started at KFXM, maybe 20, there was a disc jockey there by the name of Tennessee Ernie Ford. And then there was a fellow that came through, didn't stay very long, but he became very, very famous nationally. His name was John Landecker. He ended up at WLS Chicago. Great, great disc jockey. Boy, here's a story if you're old. I didn't find this out until a couple of years ago, maybe 10 years ago. But had I known, there was this fellow who lived in Riverside, in North Riverside, up by the Strong Pool. We all used to go up there and go swimming. He didn't live too far from there. His name was William Boyd, Hopalong Cassidy. And had I known that Hoppy lived 3 miles from my house, it would not have been a good thing for him, because I would have set up my tent on his lawn and never left. Hoppy lived in Riverside. I later found out that back in 1935, Hopalong Cassidy, or William Boyd, was the chauffeur at the Mission Inn Hotel, which is a beautiful hotel. I go home from Florida 3, 4, 5 times a year just to check in and stay at the Mission Inn and drive in and go spend time with my old friends at the Magic Castle. that takes up about 90% of my interest in life these days.
Do you remember any other early experiences in downtown Riverside, your old hangouts or?
Yeah, we used to have parades. We had the Deanza parades. We had, golly, yeah, celebrities would come to those too. Was it oh, you know who else lived in Riverside down at Fairmont Park? A guy by the name of Lee Duncan. And Lee Duncan owned Rin Tin Tin. So there's this beautiful, it's beautiful now. It didn't used to be beautiful, but there's this beautiful park called Fairmont Park. And at the end of Fairmont Park was Lee Duncan's house. You do know who Rin Tin Tin is, don't you?
Oh, yes.
Well, I'm running into kids these days who never heard of the Beatles.
I have a lot of memories of Fairmont Park. They had a little cheesy carnival there, a merry-go-round, a train.
I'm on a Riverside page. A bunch of us were born and grew up there. There was, when I was a little boy, I mean, this goes back a long time. Very few people remember the carousel. And I had a favorite horse. And we've been reminiscing about that on the computer the last few weeks. This carousel actually still working. They moved it from Fairmont Park, and there is a park on my bucket list to travel to before it disappears completely, and ride my favorite horse on that carousel.
Do you remember what horse it is?
I certainly do. It was the White Stallion. Yeah, somebody put a picture of the carousel on the computer a couple of weeks ago, and he took it just at the right angle. And it's the first time in too many years I saw my White Stallion. So I'm going to go ride it again.
As I remember, they had a roller coaster, a train ride.
It wasn't much of a roller coaster.
No, they were cheesy rides.
Yeah.
But you know, when you were our age, they were sure fun.
Oh, yeah. You remember the swimming pool in Fairmont Park?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I almost drowned in that thing. Boy, there was great adventure in those days.
Did you have a favorite, like a drive-in, or like we did in San Bernardino, we had McDonald's? What did they have in Riverside back then?
You know, the E Street McDonald's was the first, not the first McDonald's, but you know the story on that?
I do.
Yeah, yeah, that's where Ray Kroc bought the McDonald business. He took control of the McDonald Brothers restaurant and then started from there. I think the first one was really back in the Chicago area because he was a malted milk machine salesman.
Yeah, the one in Chicago, but the one on E Street above, 2 blocks above Baseline?
Yes.
Right up behind Sage's.
We had Tuxies. We'd cruise Magnolia Avenue and we'd all end up at Tuxies. And then we'd go to Delia's Grinders. Delia's and Tuxies were the two big places back in those days in Riverside.
Either one of them still exist?
Well, Delia's does. Tuxies is still there, but it doesn't sell the same kind of hamburgers and malts that it did back then.
Your transition from doing $35 magic shows up to actually going to radio school, what transpired then?
Well, I was in the plays in high school. I was playing a part of Oedipus in Sophocles' Oedipus. And I made the commercial. Actually, it was a public service announcement. It wasn't a commercial. That Polly was putting on Sophocles' Oedipus, and it was playing on KFXM. And the disc jockey on KFXM said, "Boy, that kid's got a great voice. He ought to be in radio." Well, that's all it took. So from that time on, I was hanging out at the radio station. I didn't know what else to do.
What were the chain of events that led you to getting your first job at KFXM?
Well, KDUO was owned by Howard Tellis, which also owned KFXM. It was in a different studio. It was on 8th Street, now called University Avenue in Riverside. And KFXM had moved. They were out in the transmitter shack. It was later that the Holiday Inn Hotel with the Glass Case Studios was created. I had worked for KDUO in Riverside, the sister station. Then I went into USC, and I got a job working at KDUO's sister station, KFXM, at the hotel, Holiday Inn. On weekends, I would drive back and forth between Los Angeles and Riverside. Then, when I graduated, they gave me a job as a disc jockey. And I did that for, I don't know, a long time, I guess.